Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
I'm so delighted. Our next guest is back on the programme. He's an amazing man, a legendary CIA analyst. He briefed multiple US presidents. He's involved with Veterans for Peace as well. He's a terrific peace activist, an incredibly principled man. He's just been in Palestine. Now, he writes and blogs regularly on his website, McGovern.com, about geopolitics, about US foreign policy, about Syria and the rest of it. I'm delighted to welcome back to the show our old friend, Ray McGovern. Ray, welcome back and thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Richie. Glad to be with you.
Now, I'm going to tweet out your article while we're chatting about your visit to Palestine. And you were in great company there. I know you were there with people like Daniel Ellsberg and Dan Maguire, and there's some wonderful photographs on there. The article is terrific. Why, this time around, Ray, why did you visit Palestine, and what happened when you were there? How did you find it when you arrived? How are they getting on, basically?
Well, first off, Richie, were it today, they wouldn't let us in. The new law passed 2 weeks, not 2 weeks, but 2 days ago, prohibits anyone who shows any support for BDS, boycott, disinvestment, and sanctions against Israel for its occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights for the last, get this now, for the last 50 years. Anybody who thinks that the kind of pressure that we successfully put on South Africa to end its apartheid, anyone who thinks that that can be applied to Israel is not welcome there and will not be let in. So first off, we were glad to have gone 3 weeks ago. Today, we couldn't get in. Now, what we saw there, well, it's really hard to describe. Let me say this, that we were a group of 8, 3 young veterans from the Afghan and Iraqi wars, and 3 older veterans like me from the Vietnam years. And then we had a videographer and a photographer with us. Now, it was very, very hard for the younger veterans, because what we saw the Israelis doing is what they found themselves doing in Iraq and Afghanistan, kicking down doors, following the same tactics that are typical of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, in the territories that they occupy. Now, that was hard, because the conclusion that they reached was partly that, whoa, where did these tactics come from? Well, they were, quote, tried and true, end quote, oppressive tactics used by Israel for, well, 50 years, if not more. And so it was really hard for the younger veterans to kind of stomach this and to realize, wow, that's what we were ordered to do. Now, the 3 veterans, there were 2 from Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, they were all from Iraq and Afghanistan. They had to deal with that, but it wasn't as though they hadn't faced into that already. So 2 of them had been making addresses and speeches around the country, owning up to what they were forced to do or what they were ordered to do, and why they left, why they separated when they found out what kind of cruelty this was, and that there was no reason in God's name that they should be doing this. So that was one aspect that was particularly tough. Now, we're walking through East Jerusalem, and we have these big red sweatshirts on, okay, hoodies, and it says Veterans for Peace, Free Palestine, right? Now, who comes up to Miko Peled? And for those of you who don't know who Miko is, he just actually completed a series of lectures in London. He is the so-called general's son. He is the son of a very prominent Israeli general who was involved in the 48 war and then in the 67 war as a general. And the story in that family is really quite poignant because Miko's father was not about to abuse the Palestinians. His mother refused to move into a Palestinian home when that was de rigueur. We're the conquerors. Palestinians, get out of your nice homes there in Jerusalem, who were coming in. And so what happened was his niece, who was, I think, 10 at the time, was killed in a terrorist bombing of a bus in Tel Aviv. And so the Hoi Aristoi, the creme de la creme, convened in the Pellet's house and said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? How are we going to get back? And his sister, the mother of the girl, said, we're not going to get back. The blood soaking stops here. We're not going to do the usual thing. And that sort of braced Miko, who was younger than his sister, and encouraged him eventually, together with his father in his own way. But Miko got in his car and went onto the West Bank, fearing desperately that he was going to get killed immediately because he didn't know any Palestinian. They only knew what he was taught. And he was welcomed with open arms by the Palestinians living there outside Jerusalem. So that started a journey for him. He wrote a book. It's really very good.
Great.
General's Son. And it was he who was with us this early evening when all of a sudden this very familiar fellow comes up to us and he says, Miko. And Miko looks at him. He says, Mordecai. You know who it was? It was Mordecai Vanunu.
Right, fantastic.
Yeah, the Israeli whistleblower who insinuated himself into Dimona, took copious photos, and released to the world the fact that the Israelis were building nuclear weapons. So here he is walking around unassumedly in East Jerusalem. And so we sat down, we had a wonderful supper, and he says, now this was by chance. We said, yeah. Why is that important? Well, because I'm not allowed to contact any people from the West unless it's by chance.
I was just going to ask, Ray, because the last we heard of Mordecai was that he was under house arrest again, but he's obviously not. But he's been watched, obviously, and he's been told not to associate with anybody from the West, as you said there, unless he happens upon them. And lo and behold, he bumped into Ray McGovern, Daniel Ellsberg, and Miko Peled, amongst others. Fantastic.
Yeah, well, recognized Miko. So we had a wonderful, wonderful time. And the best thing, of course, is that when we asked Mordecai if he would like to join Sam Adams Associates for Integrity and Intelligence, he said, of course. And so we have two deans of this fraternity, Dan Ellsberg, who was a very, very close friend of Mordecai, and whose example, I dare say, Mordecai knew of and followed. And so we're blessed with a new member of the Sam Adams Associates. And if anyone is interested in learning more about that, go to samadamsaward.ch. We put this thing on the Swiss thing so it wouldn't be interfered with.
It wouldn't be tampered with. samadamsaward.ch. Folks, make a note of that. samadamsaward.ch. Raymond McGovern is on the line, 16 minutes past the hour. Raymond, two questions. One, were you guys followed and watched, and was anything said to you by the Israelis while you were there? And two, what sort of condition is Gaza still in?
What sort of condition is what?
Does Gaza remain in today? What is it like in Gaza?
In Gaza, we didn't get to Gaza. It's very, very difficult to get there. Just 7 years ago or 6 years ago, I was on the U.S. boat to Gaza. We were all set to sail, and there was a lot of sabotage in the Greek ports. And then the Greeks said, no, you can't sail to Gaza because our President Obama, couldn't persuade Bibi Netanyahu not to do the same thing he had done the previous year to the Mavi Marmara, where 8 people were killed, including a United States citizen. So Obama tried to get Bibi to say, well, let him go this time. And Bibi just smiled And so Obama leaned all over the Greeks and said, please don't let any of those ships, including the U.S. boat to Gaza, leave port. We left anyway. We got 11 nautical miles into the Aegean, and the Greek Coast Guard was sent to rein us in with the kind of, black uniforms and machine guns that are typically used in such circumstances. So that's a long way of saying that Gaza is still closed. And even though conditions in Gaza are among the worst in the world, it is the largest outdoor concentration camp that you could ever imagine. The people are suffering there greatly. We couldn't get in. So we were in the West Bank. We were in Jerusalem. And we got to the privilege of going through the various checkpoints. There's a checkpoint for every 5 miles, it seems. And we were tightly scrutinized, especially after our first action, which was in a place called Bilin. The residents there go to the wall every Friday, and they demonstrate. And they say, look, this is our land you're walling in. And it's got pretty violent on some occasions. We were tear gassed, but we escaped without any physical injury, other than I still can't hear so very well from these, what do they call them, shock grenades.
Right.
They boom. So that was the first tear gassing. Then we went to Hebron, which was celebrating an anniversary of when they started demonstrating against the wall. Hebron is the city where a Jewish settlement was emplaced right in the middle of the city, and some of the streets cordoned off, and the Israeli soldiers there to make sure that no Palestinians threaten the Israelis who are inserted there. Well, we had a big demonstration there, and some of our guys got pretty meanly attacked by tear gas and these sound grenades. And actually, I got a tear gas canister on my left arm. I could still see the bruise. Luckily, I moved quickly to the right, or else it could have been real trouble. The last time we were gassed, or I should say tear gassed, was in a place called Nabi Saleh, which is just 6 kilometers outside of Ramallah, one of their big, the capital of the Palestinian Authority, to the degree they have authority at all. Suffice it to say that we joined the local Palestinians, all 8 of us. We went up to this spring that had been confiscated by the settlement up above that mountain, and we demonstrated, at which time the settlers came. It was really pretty brutal. They got out of their cars and they went for the women first. You could see it on video. They hit these women in the face with their fists. Some of our veterans went to the women's aid, got knocked over, and to their great credit, I have to tell you, I've never witnessed such a good demonstration of nonviolent resistance. Now, these guys are Marines, 2 of them. 3 of them were Marines, and they could have done in this big, large Israeli settler. Instead, they held their hands, they parried the blows, and they went and helped the other guy get off these women he was brutalizing. So that was really hard to take, but very much to their credit, these young fellows who have been instruments of violence in Iraq and Afghanistan have learned a great deal. They were an incredible witness to all of us, including us older guys. And when a car tried to run us down, we had this big banner saying "End Apartheid." Matt Ho, who was a Marine major in Afghanistan and Iraq, he stood right in the front, and luckily the guy started skidding. Okay, then what does Matt do? He goes down to the driver's window. He says, "Open it up." The guy opens it up. And then he says very politely, "Why did you try to run us over just now? We're just we're not armed. We don't have anything other than signs because you've seized this land. Why are you doing that?" The driver was completely nonplussed.
Brilliant.
He didn't know what to do, and eventually got out of the car and started attacking some of the women and some of the photographers. Anyway, but we were there as a witness that this is an international problem. that Israel should not be able to should not be able to get away with seizing Palestinian territory. And in this particular village, Nabi Saleh is the only village on something called a hillock, dominated by mountains with well-watered, well-equipped little cities that housed the settlers. And at last count, there were between 500,000 and 700,000 settlers in the occupied territories, occupied after 1967. And it doesn't look like there's any prospect for a two-state solution, because they have created what they call facts on the ground. 750,000 Israelis is equal to about 1/3 of the Palestinian population there. They are facts on the ground. The only real solution is a one-state solution, and there the choice will be between apartheid and a Jewish nation with others suppressed, or a one person, one vote nation. And I think that's probably in the cards for the distant future. Now, when we asked the Palestinians about these things, how do you feel about a one-state solution? They looked at us in disbelief. And they said, hey, what we're trying to do is end the occupation. Don't you get that through your head? The occupation is the problem. We have to get these people who are in our land, who are occupying it and preventing us from living a normal life, get them out of here. Who cares? Two-state, one-state? Come on, you guys. You in Washington sit around talking about one-state, two-state solution. We live in real life here. And we saw what that was like at Nabi Saleh, where we all get gassed pretty badly. There were lots of sound grenades. I'm still not hearing very well. And we saw what the Palestinians were trying to do to keep hope alive. And that's the big thing. One of the leaders there, I had a long talk with him. I said, aren't you afraid that you'll antagonize the Israelis, that your house is already earmarked for demolition? It was a beautiful house. Aren't you concerned that if you keep witnessing this way, keep going to the spring that was seized by the settlers, and keep demonstrating that they're going to get back at you? And the leader said to me, Ray, the alternative is worse. I said, what's that? He said, the alternative is to acquiesce and do nothing and become virtual slaves here. How can I tell my young children not to go to the wall and demonstrate? How can I do that? How can we keep hope alive if we acquiesce and say, oh, well, nothing we can do about it? And so these are very courageous people who were happy to support them. Several of our tougher guys, not including me, stayed that night just to make sure that the settlers didn't come back, or that the army didn't make one of these house raids, which are all too familiar to our younger veterans. In the event, they didn't, and the reason was perhaps because of the international presence that we offered, but equally possible because it was the Sabbath. And settlers and the army, don't like to do that kind of violence on the Sabbath. They prefer to wait till Sunday or Monday. Thank you very much.
How noble of them. I want to ask you a couple of more questions about that, and then I want to talk about Trump and Israel, among one or two other things if we have time, because this is fascinating. I don't want to interrupt this, because you're giving an insight that most of us, including me, we probably will never get. I don't imagine ever going to Jerusalem and meeting the people that you met there. Tell us about the Israeli resistance, because programs like ours, we get accused all the time of producing very unbalanced programs on the Middle East. And I suppose they are, to the untrained ear, they're unbalanced. We definitely focus on that situation by interviewing Palestinians when we can and talking to people like you who've been there when we can. And we do that because we're well aware that these people are precluded from appearing on the commercial and the corporate media channels. So that's the reason we do that. But I am mindful, Ray, that there are Jewish citizens, Jewish people in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, in the country, whom are against it. They don't often get mentioned. Did you encounter, humanitarian Jews there who are, who are horrified by what's happening to Palestinians and who are standing against it? What sort of... Go ahead, Ray.
Thank you for asking that, Richie. That's a very good question, and the answer, I'm pleased to say, is yes, hell yes. In Hebron, it was a very major anniversary of demonstrations against the wall, which runs right through there. There were hundreds of Jewish folks from Tel Aviv who came out there to stand with us as we stood with one sheikh and other progressive fighters for justice as we approached the wall where the Israelis had sealed off the one main street where the markets used to be, and they came with us and were gassed the same way we were. Luckily, the wind was blowing the right way, and so we found a hilltop, and only a few of us got really hurt with the gas. But they were there, and they were also there in Nabi Saleh. And if you just look at Nabisaleh, Google it, and you'll see some fine reporting from Israeli photographers, videographers, and reporters about the demonstration just last Thursday in Nabi Saleh. And you could see video of how this settler gets out of his car, runs up to the first woman, Arab woman he sees, punches her with his fist right in the face. And then one of our Marine guys says, "Yeah, this is not gonna go down." And while I'm around here, he goes to their aid, and this other guy pushes him over a rock. I said, you're really nonviolent. He said, "Well, Ray, yeah, that's part of it, but you didn't see he's got a sidearm, right?"
Right, he could have shot him. Yeah.
All the settlers had sidearms. My God, it was just awful. But your point is very well taken. There are a lot of people in Israel that see the injustice, see the corruption of their religion. I mean, their religion at its purest is based on Yahweh's appeal for justice. And, when the settlers said to me, "Well, God promised us this land," I said, "Where do you see that?" "Oh, well, it's in Deuteronomy 15.
Yeah, it's in the Bible, yeah.
Now, I'm a Catholic, and we weren't really encouraged to read the Bible. Some of it's pretty obscene, right? But there's one verse, Richie, that I know from the Hebrew Scriptures, and it's Deuteronomy 15:4. Look it up. So the settler says, I said, "What is that?" He says, "Well, it says, you shall have the promised land as your own land." And I said to him, "How come you only read the first half of Deuteronomy 15:4? He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Read the whole thing." This was a rabbi from Cleveland, right? A leader of one of these settlements. So he went on. He said, "Well, you shall have the whole land as your land so that there will be no poor among you." I said, "Oh, so it was a deal, huh?" Well, it was kind of like a covenant. You can have the land, or you can live in the land, so there will be no poor. What about all those Palestinians at the bottom of the hill here who have no running water, and you're watering a grass up here? What about them? So that there be no poor among them? Come on, give me a break, The Bible says lots of stuff, but that one verse does not justify you occupying Palestinian land. So that's the way it went. And it's a sad thing to see, because the only encouraging thing to see is that the Palestinians are not going to give up. They're not going to quit. And to the degree we can support them, because it is apartheid right there now. And even, Bishop Tutu was there a couple of years ago, and he said, this apartheid is worse than what we had in South Africa. And it is in many respects. So we got to work to make sure that those Israelis who see the justice angle of this work with us and with other internationals to bring people like Bibi Netanyahu around to seeing that Yahweh, to the degree he's a real, or he or she is a real entity, that the only thing that Yahweh really cares about, just like Jesus of Nazareth, is that we do justice, okay? That we do justice, and that there be no poor among you.
That's right. That we love one another and we don't kill one another. It's interesting you say that because Karen is in Glasgow. We've had a lot of tweets on this. I'm not going to get a chance to read them all. We've had a lot of tweets on it. A lot of people thrilled that you were there and they're listening with great interest. I've tweeted the article, which is at raymcgovern.com. Get on there, bookmark Ray's website, because Ray puts articles on there regularly. The sort of geopolitical analysis that you're not getting from CNN and the BBC. Karen said, well, if God promised them the land, I wonder what he'd say if you knew what they were doing with it. I'm raging here. That's to paraphrase what Ray said there. 27 minutes to the top of the hour. It's flying the time, as it always does when Ray is on. So Ray, Trump he was already elected when we spoke last. We spoke last in early December, we had a chat, and he was already elected. He's been in office 45 days, as our first guest reminded me, Lionel, the media analyst from New York earlier on, RT. I'm sure you know of Lionel. So we were talking a little bit about that. And we can talk about these CIA revelations today that Trump fans are saying, is circumstantial evidence that the CIA were able to manipulate malware to make it look like Trump and the Russians were in cahoots and all of that. We can talk about that if you want in the time we have allotted. But seeing as we're on Israel, and we encourage people as well, not just Israel, but if there's a corporation doing bad anywhere, if there's a business anywhere doing harm to anybody or to the environment, don't buy their products. It's as simple as that. Vote with your feet and with your wallet. And I would endorse that. But Ray, this guy comes in, he had a love-in. He had a John and Yoko type love-in with Benjamin Netanyahu a couple of weeks ago. He talked about a one-state solution that would favour the Israelis. And he talked a lot about the hatred that Palestinian children are being brought up with, and this was a big barrier. This is the sort of nonsense. I don't even know if the Palestinians are aware of what he's saying and what he's doing, but it doesn't bode well, does it, Ray? And he surrounded himself, it would appear, with Goldman Sachs, bankers and neocon Zionists. It's not good, is it? It's not looking good anyway in terms of the US and what the US will do to play a part in justice for Palestine.
Well, I'm afraid I have to agree. Just to finish up about the seizing of territory, one of our main conclusions was simply that it's a mistake to say that God is primarily a real estate agent, right?
Yeah.
That's all right, you choose, go here and so forth. It's really hard to read Trump. The ambassador that has been now approved, our ambassador, is known to have financed many of the settlers that have taken over places in East Jerusalem, which is a international city, and he's bad news. There's no real sign that anyone could get to Trump and say, look, this is what we see in the West Bank. This is what's going on, and what I would hope is that he and some of his retinue might be able to hear the truth and see it on the 50th anniversary of the June War in 1967, and particularly the fact that the Israeli aircraft and Israeli patrol boats, torpedo boats, tried their damnedest to sink the USS Liberty on June 8th, 1967, the USS Liberty being in international waters, a spy ship. Everyone knew it was a spy ship. You could tell that by all the antennae bursting out of it. But they tried to sink it, and they tried to sink it and leave no survivors. Now, that is clear. It's clear from the intercepted messages, control tower to pilot to control tower, pilot. Hey, that's an American flag there. That's an American ship. Follow your orders, sink it. One torpedo hit it midships, killed the entire Marine contingent immediately. 34 U.S. naval people and NSA types killed, 132 seriously wounded. The ship only managed to escape sinking because one really courageous sailor from middle of Texas who knew how to use baling wire, right? So he says to the captain, look, Captain, I think I can put up a signal there so we can get an SOS out. The captain says, Are you kidding? Look at that deck. It's full of napalm. You're going to go out there and try? He says, yeah, the Israelis destroyed all the antennae that we had working, but this one, I think I can, kind of couple it up and get an SOS. So the captain says, okay, go ahead. I did. His name was Terry Halbardier. He just died last year. But he got the thing connected. They got an SOS out, and the commander of the Sixth Fleet says, my God, one of my ships is being attacked. He lets aircraft from the USS Saratoga, the USS America, go fly into where his ship is being attacked. And halfway through, now get this, Richie, halfway through, the commander of the Sixth Fleet gets a call from the Pentagon, McNamara, Secretary of Defense. He says, we understand that you've sent those aircraft out into the Eastern Med. We want you to call them back. And you know what that gutsy admiral said? He says, sir, I'm afraid one of my ships is being attacked. I need to speak to your supervisor.
Fantastic, Ray. And
LBJ gets on the phone. And you know what he says? It's on the record here. He says, look, Admiral, I tell you to get those planes back. You're too sweet, man. We don't want to embarrass our close ally, Israel. And to his credit or discredit, the admiral complied. The ships broke off the almost attack, went back to their aircraft carriers, and as soon as the Israelis intercepted the SOS, of course, they got out of Dodge right quick. So the Captain McGonigal, a really courageous guy, steered the ship to Malta, where they were able to, get the wounded into hospitals and so forth. Now, the worst thing about this is that those sailors were briefed by high-level officers, and they were told, look, you are not to mention what happened today. You are not to mention it to one another, not to mention it to your wives or your children. You are not to mention this, and if you do, court-martial proceedings will proceed. Now, I know some of these survivors, okay, some of these crew from the USS Liberty. You want to talk about PTSD? You put a guy in a position where the U.S. Navy, the U.S. government, the U.S. Congress has pretty much forfeited their responsibility to protect you.
Abandoned them, yeah.
That they won't let you talk to your fellow crew. Now, the reason I mention all of this is because it is my idea that if on June 8th, 2017, the 50th anniversary, we can have an appropriate ceremony at Arlington Cemetery, where we do convene every year on that date, and have it supervised or have somebody there who knows about Terry Halbardier, the young guy who's strung up the baling wire and got those things connected. And guess who that guy is? He's a congressman now, and he's chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Okay? Now, if he would come and own up to what he knows about Terry Halbardier and why he gave him the Silver Star at a ceremony that I was present at in Central Valley, California, where Nunes, the representative, is from, that would be terrific, because it would right an injustice in some measure that has existed ever since 15 years ago. So this is an occasion to remind people that not only did the Israelis attack Cairo, and not only did they obliterate the armed forces of Syria, Jordan, and Egypt in a blitz attack, unprovoked, but they destroyed one of our ships, or almost did. And what was the reason? The reason is not completely clear, not as clear as the intercepts, which show it was deliberate. But the best reason that I've seen is that the Israelis were going to go up the next day on the Golan Heights and seize those from Syria, okay? Now, the only way they could do that is by landline communications and other communications that they knew the USS Liberty would intercept and send back to Washington. Now, Washington had been trying to say, look, you demolished the Syrian armed forces, the Egyptian armed forces, the Jordanian armed forces. For God's sake, don't go up on the Golan. Now, the Israelis, as you probably know, Richie, prefer to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. And they didn't want any U.S. ambassador leaning all over Moshe Dayan and saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. They just did it, okay? That's what they did the next day. They didn't want the U.S. knowing about this beforehand. And to this day, the Golan Heights, which we now know has significant mineral wealth, including petroleum underneath it, are in Israeli hands. So it's a big story. We were there in a more on-the-ground kind of witness, but that's the general story. And I hope that the Israelis who are justice-oriented and other people in the world will rally behind the injustice that has happened here and help the Palestinians work out a more square deal.
Fantastic, Ray. We've got about 8 or 9 minutes left, and I'm glad we spent so much time on Israel. We've not talked a lot about Israel of late. Trying to get some of the pro-Israeli groups in the UK and the Republic of Ireland to come on and debate the media coverage of Israel and to debate their own points of view and their own objectives. Some of these groups are getting discussions at universities shut down, discussions about how to help Gaza and help Palestine and Palestinians. It's very anti-democratic and, of course, anti-free speech. But none of these organisations will accept the invitation to come on and talk about it, which is a tragedy, really. But there you go. On Trump and on the news today that WikiLeaks have released information about CIA having the ability to use malware and tapping into smart televisions and all this sort of stuff. Spoke at length about this in the first hour. Trump supporters are seeing this as vindication for Trump that he's taking on the deep state and the intelligence agencies, and it's some way proving Trump's long held assertion, well, long held, I suppose, since he began campaigning to be president, that he's been targeted and tapped and he's been followed, and the deep state and the media are out to get him. Now, it's interesting. There's no definitive proof whatsoever in these WikiLeaks cables that Trump was hacked, but there's a lot of talk about the malware being the type of malware that can be used to make it look like the Russians are doing this and that and the other thing. It's only developing this, Ray, so forgive me if I'm putting you on the spot, but in the short time we have available, what is your initial feeling about all of this? What's really going on here?
Well, first off, Richie, if further proof were needed, the CIA has been operating without any oversight whatsoever. The congressional oversight committees have become the overlook committees.
Right, look the other way. Yeah.
Of not wanting to know anything, and so they don't get told anything. That's number one. The other thing is that this offensive hacking capability, this is something that is supposed to be done by NSA. And the text that I've read so far indicates that the CIA did this all by itself, thank you very much. A competitor reaching out, not only monitoring, but interfering with cyber activity and offensive capability. Now, this is, this smacks of the kind of activity that Congress should surely know about, and the president as well. Someone should ask Obama, hey, do you know this was going on?
Yeah.
I guess he'd say, beats the hell out of me. They never told me anything, right? So the unique part of the disclosures today is simply this. I haven't heard anybody yet blame it on the Russians.
Right, for once. Yeah.
Okay, so this is Julian Assange at his best. Now, uncharacteristically, he took precautions and said, I don't want to release people's names. So he did redact some of the more sensitive names that were included in these activities, but it's all very clear what the CIA was doing. What leaps out from all this is that the CIA, under this new directorate that was set up by John Brennan for cyber warfare, they're really good at hacking, but they're a bunch of hacks when it comes to defensive measures.
Yeah.
Assange has got the whole bill of goods on them. Why? Well, because they're not really good at they're hackers, and they're not really good at defensive measures. So it's almost ludicrous in its scope. Um, that the hacks are wide in scope, and they do reveal that all these U.S. companies, that pretend to offer all these protective devices, to make sure that everything is secure. Well, the CIA is in there in the beginning, even before the security measures are introduced. So what's the bottom line here? Well, one of the things that I usually like to point out is that the head of the Democratic delegation in the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer from New York, said publicly to a very prominent MSNBC person 2 months ago that, Trump is not as smart as I thought he was. And she says, well, what do you mean? He says, well, you don't take on the CIA. They have ways to get you. I mean, they have 6 ways to Sunday to get you. And I thought that a smart businessman like Donald Trump wouldn't take on the CIA. Wow. Now that's the reality. That's what's happening. And when Trump's people are saying today, well, see, that shows they were monitoring Trump. Well, it's a little misleading because they're not just monitoring Trump. They're monitoring everyone.
Everybody.
Now, the mind boggles that they could do everyone, but they do everyone. Now, some people who pretend to know about these things, a lawyer in New York, for example, said yesterday on Amy Goodman, oh, yeah, but they only collect the metadata and they don't have the substance of these things. Well, they do have the substance. That's why they're building these incredibly large storage facilities. What they do is, look, this is how they do it. Okay, so they have a code word, Trump, okay? And then they have Russia. And then they have Putin, okay? And they plug in these things and out spits everything they have that joins these 3 things together, the substance of it, not just the metadata. And so Trump is right. They have all the stuff on him. I think he exaggerates when he says Obama personally authorized this. Obama probably himself didn't know the extent of this monitoring.
You know what, Ray? That's a brilliant place to leave it. I'm sorry we've run out of time, and I do want to sincerely, and it'll sound sycophantic, but it's not meant to, because I mean it sincerely. I take liberties with your time. We bring you on, and we always keep you longer than we ask you to come on, and I shouldn't probably do that. But I really appreciate your time. On that, listen, I was talking today to a former MI5 agent, and they were saying, look, we kept goods on senior politicians across the aisle, both parties, all the parties, for years here, and it still goes on. I think that's a point well made there. Another point well made is people are asking the question, are we being duped here? Is there something going on, as there often is, in the background? It's very serious and we've been distracted by this, and that's another question I suppose we can look at another day. Ray's website is great, folks. Go on to raymcgovern.com, bookmark it. I really, 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 really appreciate, Ray, you talking about that trip to Israel. It's fantastic because it brings it home, I think we talk a lot about Israel when there's an operation and bombs are being dropped in Gaza, or we hear about somebody who was shot by a soldier. But the rest of the time we're talking about other things, and life goes on for the Palestinians. And it's a wonderful thing that you went over there with Daniel Ellsberg and everybody else and come back to tell people what's really going on there. It really is. And then to talk about the Israeli resistance, not to paint people with the same brush, the Israelis themselves within that country, there are people who are disgusted by their own government, and that doesn't get told often enough either. I'll give you the absolute final word on today's conversation 30 seconds before we go, but sincere thanks again, Ray. I love listening to you. I really mean that.
Well, you're most welcome. What I would add is simply this, that there are laws in our country against collecting on American citizens, especially prominent ones like Donald Trump. However, GCHQ, the British equivalent of NSA, is free to collect that information. And my sources tell me that some of the most sensitive information that has been disclosed against Donald Trump has come from GCHQ on the QT, so to speak, with John Brennan giving it to people who would publicize it. This is really incestuous. It's really playing fast and loose with the laws, but that's how we have this kind of relationship, and GCHQ is a twin brother to NSA. There's no separating them, and the mischief potential there is terrific.
Fantastic, Ray. And people need to wise up about their smart devices and their phones. They're not very smart, and they're an open window for these agencies. Thanks again, Ray. I'm sure we'll talk again in the near future. Really appreciate your time, and can't say that enough. Cheers, mate. Look after yourself.
You're most welcome.
The terrific Ray McGovern on the line to us there. Fascinating insight into the reality of East Jerusalem, Israel, the resistance to the occupation there by the Palestinians against the settlers. Incredible stuff. This will be on podcast real soon after the live show ends in a few minutes, and it'll be on YouTube as well. And I can't again recommend highly enough that you go to raymcgovern.com, bookmark even Ray's website, read his articles there and share them around the Twitter sphere and Facebook world while you still can. Terrific stuff.